What do a werewolf, a vampire, and a 12-year-old girl have in common? All these elements are connected to the murder of two loving parents and their 8-year-old son. Sunday, April 23, 2006, was a clear but frosty morning in Madison Head, Alberta, Canada. Despite it being mid-spring, Garrett decided it was the perfect time to visit his friend across the street. He hoped they could play on the quiet street where their houses stood, as they had been doing since the end of winter. The boy Garrett was visiting was his 8-year-old friend, Tyler Richardson. The Richardson family, Deborah, Mark, Tyler, and their 12-year-old daughter Jasmine, lived in a well-kept gray house with a gabled roof and a manicured lawn, an ideal picture of a middle-class family. But on this spring day, what lay before their house was far from perfect. As Garrett approached the house, he noticed that the blinds were still closed, and when he knocked, no one answered. It was Sunday, and the family usually returned from church by this time. The car was parked in the driveway, so they were home. Garrett peered through the living room window but saw no movement. He decided to go to the basement where he and Tyler sometimes played. As Garrett looked through the basement window in the bright streetlight, his eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness. Garrett saw what he thought were the outlines of two bodies lying motionless and covered in blood on the floor. He hurried home to tell his mother what he thought he had seen. The woman was shocked and doubted whether what he said was true, as her son was known to embellish details. She took her son by the hand, and they crossed the street together. Garrett led his mother to the basement window he had looked through. The woman also saw two bloody bodies and immediately called the police. What the investigators discovered inside the Richardson house shocked both the police and the public, sparking discussions for many years. The police arrived and forced open the front door of the eerily empty Richardson house. They called out, but no one answered, so they went downstairs to where Garrett and his mother had allegedly seen the bodies. As the officers entered the gloomy basement, they saw two blood-soaked adults lying on the floor with glassy eyes, clearly dead. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, the ceiling, and the walls. Despite their injuries, the deceased were identified as Mark and Deborah Richardson. The couple had been brutally murdered in their own basement, but their bodies were not the only thing that startled the officers that day. Upstairs, in one of the bedrooms, they found the remains of the 8-year-old Tyler, also covered in blood, just like his parents. He had a deep wound across his throat, extending from ear to ear. By then, the police had searched the rest of the house and realized something was missing. Family photos of the Richardsons adorned the walls and mantel, showing a family of 4. It became evident that the eldest child, Jasmine, was neither dead nor alive. She was missing. Since the rest of the family had been killed, the police were worried about her well-being. Her room was in perfect order, with everything in its place. Outside her room in the area where the bodies were found, there were no obvious signs of a struggle. The family car was still in the driveway, indicating that the criminals had their own transportation. Given that the bodies were already cold and the blood was thick and coagulated, it seemed the Richardson family had been killed the night before. Officers assumed that one or more persons had entered the house and killed Tyler, Deborah, and Mark. But what about Jasmine? Where had she gone? Was she kidnapped? Or was she far from home and accidentally escaped the murder? These questions remained unanswered. Just hours after discovering the Richardson family's bodies, authorities issued statements through the media, expressing grave concern for Jasmine's safety and urging anyone with information about her whereabouts to come forward. While the police awaited news about Jasmine, investigations began. Every aspect of the Richardsons' lives leading up to the crime was scrutinized. Family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances were questioned, anyone who might have had a motive or harbored anger towards the family, but nothing was resolved. It seemed the Richardsons were exactly who they appeared to be, a close-knit and loving family, with the exception of one family member, the eldest child, Jasmine. The day after the crime, the tone of the police statements regarding Jasmine changed dramatically. Instead of worrying about her welfare, the police now sought to locate a person connected to the murder case. Not many details were disclosed, but reading between the lines, it was clear that Jasmine had become the prime suspect in the murder of her family. Under Canadian law, this meant the media could no longer mention Jasmine by name due to her age. They began referring to her simply as JR, obscuring her identity. By 2006, Jasmine had grown up as a bright and caring girl. She attended a local Catholic school where she was an excellent student, encouraged by her parents to pursue her passions both in and out of school. She was quite shy and quiet, spending much of her time with her family and close friends. But as Jasmine grew older, everything began to change. Firstly, her appearance transformed. She looked much older than her age due to her premature curves. The sweet photos she had once posted on social media with kittens or flowers vanished. In their place were images of a girl with heavy black eyeliner, wearing dark, torn clothing. Her taste in music changed from the pop she loved as a child to aggressive heavy metal. Around this time, Jasmine started identifying as gothic, drifting away from her friend group. When she got her own computer, she subscribed to various gothic-themed websites. Jasmine's profile featured a fictitious name and an exaggerated age. The slogan on her profile read, "Welcome to my tragic world." She described herself as a witch preaching the Wicca religion, nocturnal and crazy, with a love for dark poetry, criminal psychology, blood, and human anatomy. Jasmine interacted on these sites with others who belonged to the same Gothic community. Gradually, Jasmine began communicating with older men, many of whom were much older than she was. At home, she became sullen and withdrawn, losing interest in spending time with her family or usual friends. She spent hours locked in her bedroom, surfing the internet and chatting with strangers. Her clothing became increasingly provocative. Her parents, of course, loved their daughter and did not always forbid everything, but relied on her judgment and understanding that she was growing up, and many things were changing in her life. Therefore, they did not object when Jasmine asked to attend a local punk rock concert in early 2006. At this concert, her path crossed with Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was a 23-year-old man who, like Jasmine, was interested in the punk and gothic scene. They started talking, began communicating over the internet, and Jeremy asked Jasmine to be his girlfriend. Jasmine, crazy about the guy, immediately agreed. Jeremy lived in a trailer, had not completed high school, and his mother was an alcoholic who had had various partners over the years who had all mistreated Jeremy as a child. At the age of 13, he had significant troubles at school, was bullied by older boys, and was diagnosed with depression and hyperactivity after his first suicide attempt. But it wasn't his turbulent childhood that was the worst thing about Jeremy. 10 years before meeting Jasmine, Jeremy had transformed into a 300-year-old werewolf, claiming to be immortal and craving the taste of blood. He always carried a vial of blood around his neck, although it was unclear whether it was human or animal blood. Like Jasmine, Jeremy wore dark, torn clothing and listened to gothic music. It was this strange and unusual personality that attracted Jasmine. She wanted to feel older and more mature, and being with Jeremy gave her that feeling. The fact that their intimate relationship was taboo made it even more enticing. Jasmine and Jeremy knew from the start that the Richardson parents would never approve of their relationship, so they devised ways to keep their romance a secret. In a time when mobile phones were not as common as they are today, and landlines were not an option for fear that parents might find out, the couple used a Gothic community website to stay in touch. Jeremy already had an online profile that featured themes of pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. Within weeks, they were corresponding on the website, arranging meetings, and no one knew about their relationship, except for friends who found it odd. To Jasmine's distress and embarrassment, her parents began monitoring her online activities. When they discovered their 12-year-old daughter was having increasingly disturbing conversations with random strangers on the internet, they punished her and took away her computer. When her parents asked who Soul Eater was, Jasmine eventually confessed and told them everything about her boyfriend. Deborah and Mark were horrified to learn that Jeremy was 23 years old. Like any other parents, they were concerned that this man was taking advantage of their daughter. Although they had never met him, they knew nothing good would come of this relationship. The parents forbade their daughter from any contact with Jeremy and enrolled her and themselves in family psychological counseling, hoping to make Jasmine understand that Jeremy was not the right person for her. To their relief, after several consultations, Jasmine showed signs of returning to her normal state. When Jasmine sincerely promised not to communicate with men on the internet anymore and not to see Jeremy, her parents agreed to return her computer. This decision proved fateful, as they were found dead a few days later. Jasmine was missing and involved in the gruesomely brutal murders. It wasn't until the truth about Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship came to light that the police began a frantic search. They called all her friends, hoping that she had escaped the attacker who killed her parents and was staying with someone she trusted. However, friends reported seeing Jasmine only hours after her parents' death and said she seemed neither shocked nor panicked. She was in good spirits. Jasmine and Jeremy showed up at a friend's house party, and one of the friends present said Jasmine had bragged that she and her boyfriend had killed her parents, and Jeremy added that he had gutted them like fish. Friends thought the couple was joking, but the joke was gruesome. It was only the next day, when the police questioned acquaintances and friends, that they realized these bragging words were true. The couple had attended the party after killing Jasmine's entire family. The police questioned Jasmine's classmates and teachers and searched her school locker, where they found a drawing of a stick figure girl setting her parents' house on fire and driving away with her boyfriend. With this information, the tone of police statements in the media changed again. The search for Jasmine had turned into a manhunt for both Jasmine and Jeremy, now suspects in the brutal murders of 2 adults and an 8-year-old boy. By this time, Jeremy and Jasmine had had enough time to flee, and the police released their photos, hoping a tip would lead to their location. Public appeals by the authorities worked, and the next day, the couple was spotted 130 kilometers from the Richardson home. Investigators went to the address and found the sweet couple kissing under a blanket in a parked pickup truck. Both were arrested without resistance and brought in for questioning. By then, the autopsy results were in, and the causes of death for the 3 victims were clear. The attack was brutal. Deborah died first. She had multiple stab wounds all over her body, the deepest penetrating her chest by 12 centimeters and reaching her heart. Jasmine's mother bled to death in the basement. Mark was next. He had 24 wounds on his back and also bled to death in the basement, just a few meters from his dying wife. The youngest Richardson, Tyler, was the last to go. He was in his room wearing pajamas when he was stabbed 5 times, including a deep cut across his throat. After Jeremy and Jasmine were arrested, investigators questioned them separately. Jasmine admitted during her interrogation that she was very unhappy after her parents tried to separate her from Jeremy. She claimed he was the love of her life, and her parents wanted to break them apart. Jasmine told the police she came home and found her entire family murdered, but she was not at home at the time of the crime. She knew Jeremy was responsible because he said he would do it. Jasmine believed that killing her family was the ultimate expression of her boyfriend's love, and she loved him so much that she was willing to cover for him and run away with him. Jasmine denied any involvement in the murders, but Jeremy had a different story to tell. While in custody, an undercover officer posing as a prisoner was placed in his cell. In conversations with the prisoner, Jeremy openly declared that the plan to kill Jasmine's family was entirely her idea. At first, he was unhappy with the plan, but when Jasmine's parents took her computer away and insisted they couldn't see each other, Jeremy realized they had to go and agreed to participate in her plan to kill the entire family. Jeremy admitted to killing Deborah and Mark, but placed the blame for Tyler's murder solely on Jasmine. She had begged him to do it, although Jeremy would have liked to finish them all himself. During the investigation of this case, the police needed to know who was responsible for planning the murders, and thanks to Jeremy's conversation with the undercover officer, which was secretly recorded, everything became clear. When Jasmine was told how everything had really happened, she had no choice but to confess. She said she was the one who had stabbed and killed her brother, but the reason was that she did not want to leave him as an orphan. The police also had to read the internet profiles of each defendant, review their chats, and find out that the couple had exchanged thousands of messages in the few weeks since they met. In these messages was confirmation that Jasmine had devised the entire plan, which Jeremy supported, encouraging him to be more creative and pay attention to details. Jeremy wrote Jasmine a message saying, "I miss you more than killing people. We can be together and kill them." And when her computer was taken away, he wrote, "I dream of the day I can slit their throats. They will pay for their insolence, and there will finally be silence. Their blood will be the payment." The couple also discussed a time when the family would be dead, and they could flee and be together and independent. Interestingly, Jeremy was not the only one Jasmine encouraged to kill. More friends reported that Jasmine had talked about killing her parents on more than one occasion, but they had dismissed it as rebellious talk. No one could have imagined that the once sweet and friendly Jasmine would be capable of such horror. With sufficient evidence that Jasmine had conspired to kill her parents and brother, and that Jeremy was responsible for the deaths of Deborah and Mark, both were charged with triple homicide. During their interrogations and imprisonment, the couple showed neither remorse nor regret for the crime they had committed. They wrote letters to each other from their separate cells, calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Jeremy asked Jasmine to marry him, and she enthusiastically agreed. After the charges were filed, authorities wanted to know exactly how the murders had occurred that night. Jeremy said he had been inspired by the movie Natural Born Killers, in which a couple kills 9 people, calling it a love story. He said he and Jasmine had decided to be like the couple in the film and had planned the attack. Jeremy drank alcohol before putting on his mask. Jasmine led him into the Richardson house and directly to the basement. Deborah woke up from the noise and came to check. Jeremy hid and waited, then stabbed her multiple times. She fought desperately and screamed in pain and fear. Mark ran downstairs and tried to stop the attack to protect his wife, waving a screwdriver at Jeremy, but couldn't land a single blow. Jeremy was relentless and did not stop until he had stabbed Mark 24 times from both the front and back. Meanwhile, Jasmine went upstairs and stabbed her little brother in his bed. When Jeremy finished with the parents, he went upstairs to find Jasmine with her brother. Jeremy helped his girlfriend by slitting the younger Richardson's throat. After these savage events, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood, while Jasmine took a taxi to the restaurant where they met later. They then went to a friend's party to celebrate the deaths of Jasmine's family before being picked up by a friend and taken to Saskatchewan, where the couple was found and arrested. In June 2007, just a year after the murders, Jasmine was tried on 3 counts of first-degree murder. She pleaded not guilty in court, claiming she was in a zombie-like state when Jeremy killed her parents. She said her discussions about killing her parents were hypothetical and that Jeremy had pressured her to turn the idea into a real plan. When asked about her brother, she replied that she remembered him begging for his life and remembered wounding him, but claimed it was Jeremy who killed him. When asked why she had planned to kill her family, Jasmine said, "I loved him so much. I thought it would bring us closer together." Jasmine Richardson was found guilty on all counts and, under Canadian youth law, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Persons under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years in prison. Jasmine's sentence focused primarily on her rehabilitation rather than incarceration, including a 4-year stay in a psychiatric facility where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. Conduct disorder is usually diagnosed in children and is characterized by a lack of respect for others, often leading to hostile and violent behavior. Oppositional defiant disorder starts in childhood and manifests in children who are uncooperative, defiant, and hostile toward authority figures, particularly their parents. During her final years of imprisonment, Jasmine was placed under community supervision and attended special courses. In 2008, Jeremy's trial began for 3 counts of first-degree murder. His defense sought to reduce the charges to manslaughter, arguing that Jeremy was under the influence of illegal substances at the time and had lost control. They also blamed Jasmine, who had already been found guilty, arguing that she had seduced their client to commit murder and that he was in love and willing to do anything for her. Some of Jeremy's friends claimed he had asked them to help kill Mark and Deborah, or Jasmine would tear him apart if he didn't do it. Jeremy claimed that Jasmine had killed her brother herself, and he had just watched from the door. He also said he hadn't planned to kill her parents, but was waiting in the basement for Jasmine to come down. Deborah's arrival surprised him, and he had to attack. However, he contradicted himself when asked why he had killed the Richardsons. He said, "When you find your soulmate, you do whatever they want." Throughout the trial, Jeremy remained indifferent and composed, except when his mother, Jacqueline May, testified to his defense. Jacqueline, suffering from an incurable lung disease, recounted how her son had problems as a child because he was mistreated by her various partners. She remembered him being beaten with a belt and stick and pulled by the ears. Jeremy cried during his mother's testimony. She was the only person called to Jeremy's defense. The words of his mother and Jeremy's brief emotional outburst were not enough to justify him. He was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 3 life terms in prison. He would not be eligible for parole for 25 years. During his imprisonment, he changed his name to Jackson May. One of the couple's friends, Casey Lancaster, was charged with accessory to murder for driving the couple away from the crime scene and helping dispose of evidence. The crimes shocked Canada, given the age and brutality with which the family was killed. In 2016, Jasmine was released after serving her full sentence with no further conditions. The judge declared her absolute freedom and told Jasmine, "I think your parents and brother would be proud of you." Of course, the past cannot be changed, but now she lives with the knowledge that she can control her behavior. Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada without disclosing her whereabouts. Due to her age at the time of the crime, her name still cannot be published. She remains the youngest convicted multiple murderer in Canadian history. Jasmine has never expressed remorse for the murder of her family and has not apologized. This crime has sparked significant interest since Jasmine's conviction, with her story being featured in various crime and mystery shows. The audience is fascinated, trying to understand how Jasmine transformed from a naive, sweet girl into a deranged killer. The combination of a self-proclaimed vampire, a werewolf, and a gothic teenager is a recipe for creating the perfect monster. This bizarre story was reported in the media in 2008 in many countries around the world. Theories were proposed, ranging from hypnosis and testing unprecedented drugs to the involvement of secret services with poison gas. But of course, the most significant connection was between the twins. This connection was called a karmic bond, which scientists allegedly still cannot identify or explain to the public. The story began on the morning of May 17, 2008. Traffic police officers from Birmingham, monitoring footage transmitted by traffic cameras to the monitors of London's streets, suddenly discovered 2 women walking on the median strip of the suburban highway M6. Police patrols were dispatched to the scene, one of which was followed by a film crew from the Daily Morning Show. At the site where the 2 women were walking in the middle of a busy highway, the police officers and journalists initially thought they were encountering a typical situation. The women would either turn out to be eccentric individuals or drunk or drug-addicted people who had lost their sense of time and place. This incident seemed to pose no particular risks, and it seemed to everyone that this story would soon be forgotten. Who would have thought at that moment that it would take a terrifying turn? As the vehicle with the police officers and journalists drove to the scene, a report came over the radio that one of the women had run into the road and been hit by a car. Nothing was yet known about the severity of the injuries. One of the participants in these events began to regain consciousness. The story became more complicated and already had unfortunate consequences. When the reporters arrived at the scene, they saw that the police officers, who had arrived a little earlier, were already talking to the women on the roadside. Both women seemed uninjured, and the report that one of them had been hit by a car appeared to be a mistake. It later turned out that the woman had indeed been hit by a car on the road, but had fortunately remained uninjured. The twin sisters looked completely normal. They were not staggering, not screaming, and only half-heartedly listened to the officer's warnings, occasionally glancing around. The journalist began filming the officers explaining the incident with the camera, and suddenly something happened that was hard to believe, even if seen with one's own eyes. One of the sisters, Ursula, threw her bag onto the sidewalk and ran into the road just as a large truck was passing by. The quick reaction of the officer, who tried to grab her by the sleeve of her jacket, was unsuccessful. The woman, clearly in a state of mental confusion, accelerated rapidly and simply threw herself down. She did not want to be saved. She desperately wanted to die by being crushed by a massive machine. So, she jumped directly under the wheels of the vehicle. The truck driver managed to react quickly but could not stop immediately. Ursula Eriksson's legs were struck by several wheels of the trailer, causing them to break on the spot. The woman screamed once like a wounded seagull and then lay motionless on the road. Stunned by what they had seen, everyone rushed to help her. At that moment, attention to her sister, Sabine Eriksson, who was lying on the roadside, lapsed for a second, and she immediately took advantage of it. She followed her sister and also ran into the road, where she was hit by a Volkswagen Polo within a second, thrown into the air like a doll. The reality of the incident was hard to grasp. 3 meters apart lay 2 women on the road, both having wished for death at such a young age. Despite their severe injuries, they were alive and conscious. Ursula Eriksson had open fractures in her pelvis and both legs, with bones tearing through her trousers. Sabine lay on her back, struck by the powerful blow of the car that had shattered the windshield and heavily damaged the roof. Both women said nothing and barely groaned in pain. As they began to recover a little, both tried to stand despite their injuries. They did not listen to pleas and orders to remain still until the ambulance arrived, but suddenly started cursing, spitting, scratching, and fighting against the officers as if they were their worst enemies. It seemed that this fight was their way of staying alive. There was no other way, and for some reason, they repeatedly called for the police, saying, "I recognize you. You are not a real policeman," even though several officers around them kept showing their badges. During this time, Ursula was also in an emotional state, constantly trying to hit the doctors and the arriving ambulance personnel. She bit their hands, spat in their faces, and screamed the foulest curses. To calm the patient, who needed immediate surgical help, she was given a strong dose of sedatives. Only after she calmed down was she airlifted by helicopter. At this point, everyone was convinced that the twin sisters Ursula and Sabine Eriksson had been poisoned with a hallucinogenic substance. Both women were airlifted to the nearest hospital. Ursula underwent surgery. Her spleen was ruptured. Her spine, pelvis, and both legs were broken in several places. Sabina, on the other hand, was not severely injured and was handed over to the police. At this point, about 5 hours had passed since the traffic accident. Sabina had noticeably calmed down and was cheerful. There was no trace of her violent behavior. She was no longer aggressive, responded to questions, but simply did not answer many, did not try to fight or escape. In a word, she behaved normally and appropriately. This is why the police officers who picked her up were initially very surprised. After being told what kind of person they would be dealing with, the officers expected to see a real devil, but a delicate, calm, blonde girl came out of the hospital in a hospital gown and obediently went to the police car. Therefore, Sabina was not handcuffed as she took a seat in the back. Upon arrival at the police station, she talked about the weather, laughed and joked, even flirted with the officers, and allowed herself to be examined and searched. Outwardly, it seemed that this could not be the same Sabine Eriksson who had been a raging fury just a few hours earlier, ready to tear apart anyone who touched her. Now, she behaved calmly and reasonably with other police officers, not those who had tried to calm her down on the road. Soon, everyone began to treat her as relaxed and rational. These officers did not see what Sabina had done on the road. They did not fend off her kicks, did not wipe her spit from their faces, did not see the car she had smashed with her body, did not hear her, and did not try to restrain her by force. It was all somewhere out there in reports for senior colleagues and on the screens of a morning show that these officers could not watch during their shift. They tried talking to her, but Sabina seemed, for some strange reason, to have forgotten everything that had happened to her. She did not ask about her sister's fate, or showed no interest in it, but constantly checked her reflection, worried about her appearance, and looked for her clothes and jewelry. She continued to joke, and when asked about her behavior, she either remained silent or said, "I don't know." She claimed she had never wanted to harm herself or anyone else in her life. Ultimately, the interrogation brought no clarity. Later, tests revealed that neither Eriksson's sister had taken drugs or alcohol. Nothing was found in Sabina's apartment, and the police found no evidence that the sisters had ever used or purchased illegal substances. Sabina was charged with assaulting police officers and causing an accident, while Ursula was obviously pitied and escaped responsibility for her actions. A call to her husband shocked the police. He had no idea where his wife was, what had happened to her, and most importantly, did not seem particularly interested in what crime she had committed. But the real surprise for the investigators dealing with the Eriksson sisters' case was yet to come. After speaking with Sabina on the day of the incident, police and psychiatrists concluded that the woman's mental state was normal, independent of her condition on the M6 motorway. She knew where she was, who was with her, could assess time and space appropriately, and most importantly, was stable and posed no danger to herself or others. It was hard to believe, but it was also only temporary. Now there was no reason to diagnose her or commit her to a psychiatric clinic. Therefore, Sabina was held in custody for a short time. On the morning of May 19, 2008, her trial took place. She was found guilty, pleaded guilty to assaulting a police officer and causing a traffic accident, and was sentenced to a fine and 1 day in jail, which she had already served in custody. Eriksson was released, having forgotten that just a few days earlier she had deliberately thrown herself under a car and in her rage had attacked police officers. Although no one ever understood what kind of temporary madness had befallen her on the road, everyone thought that this state was irrevocably over and she could go home. Later, this decision will be regretted by many people who will never understand what they did wrong. Sabina disappeared into obscurity. Her sister Ursula would undergo several surgeries and then spend about 3 months in a psychiatric clinic. Meanwhile, investigators Ursula would piece together what had preceded the incident on the motorway. It turned out that the twins, Sabina and Ursula, were born on November 3, 1967, in the Swedish city of Sundsvall. They were not the only children. The twins also had an older sister, Mona, and their brother, Bjorn. The twin sisters were in constant contact with each other and their families, but met for the first time in 8 years on the eve of the traffic accident on May 16, 2008. On that day, Ursula flew from the United States to Sabina in Mello and stayed with her. The next day, at 2 a.m., the mysterious sisters, driven by some inner urge, boarded a ferry to Liverpool, England. Once there, they purposefully sought out the police station. In no later interview or interrogation did the sisters ever explain why they left Ireland and went to England. According to the police report, they went to the Liverpool police station at 11:30 a.m. on May 16, 2008, to report that Sabina's children in Mello were in danger. The sisters' story was so incoherent and rambling that the police officers initially could not understand them. After listening to the women's hysterical accounts and not believing them, the officers tried to verify the truth of their statements. They called the Dublin police and found that the police had been called to Sabina Eriksson's house the previous night by neighbors who had heard screams and sounds of a violent family argument. It turned out that the couple had not only quarreled but had also seriously fought. The police tried to calm the couple down and warned them of the consequences. The argument seemed to have settled, and the police left, but no one knew what was going on in the house. After listening to their Dublin colleagues, the Liverpool police realized they were dealing with a desperate woman with marital problems at home. Intervening in such matters is costly, so the women were advised to calm down and return home to their children. When they left the police station, however, the Erickson sisters did not go back home to Mello, but took a National Express bus to London at 11:30 a.m. Both carried rather large bags that were difficult to hold. The express bus driver immediately pointed out to the passengers that such luggage should be stowed in the bus's luggage compartment, but the women stubbornly refused to part with their bags. After initial grumbling, the driver let the sisters board the bus, but watched them in the rearview mirror throughout the journey, soon noticing their unusual behavior. The sisters appeared incredibly tense and constantly looked around. They whispered to each other and seemed to be planning something while clinging to their bags as if they were their greatest treasure or their salvation from certain death. When they reached the next bus stop, the driver dropped the strange women off and reported them to the station supervisor. The supervisor immediately called the police and reported that 2 women were at the stop who might have a bomb in their bags. When the police arrived and searched the Erickson sisters, they found nothing suspicious and considered the call a false alarm. Had they paid more attention to the twins' mental state at that time, they might have interrupted the series of terrible events that followed. But at that moment, their task was to prevent a possible terrorist attack, not to look into the minds of strangers. So, the sisters were released. As it turned out, for some reason, they had no money to get to London. It is unknown what was going through their minds at that time, but they likely saw the only way to reach the British capital by walking along the central strip of the M6 motorway, where they were seen on the monitors by traffic inspectors that day. You know the rest, but that is not the end of this fascinating story. Let's return to the released Sabina, who, according to psychiatrists, police officers, and judges, had returned to normalcy and no longer posed a danger to society. When she left the courthouse, she was told to go home to her husband and children, but she did not think of doing so. Instead, she wandered thoughtfully through the city, for some reason wearing her sister Ursula's green cardigan, which she had discarded before being run over by the truck, and carried her belongings given by the police in a bag. She walked into one of the city's parks, where she met 2 local men, 54-year-old Glenn Hollinshead and his friend Peter. They had just had a few glasses of spice beer in the bar and were now walking their dog, enjoying the springtime beauty with pleasant conversation. Sabina, feeling lonely and separated from her twin sister, or perhaps in a new state of madness, wanted to talk to someone. She approached the dog, petted it, said something kind, and then began a conversation with the men, word for word. She told them her sad story, that her twin sister had had a severe car accident and was now in the hospital, but she did not know which hospital, that she had no one here and no place to stay, and that her sister urgently needed to be found. Tears welled up in her eyes, and the men, moved by her distress, wanted to help her. Glenn, a former military doctor, was a sympathetic and open-hearted man and offered Sabina a place to stay for a few days. Moreover, he assured the unfortunate woman that he would help her find her sister. From that moment on, the kind man's fate was sealed. About 24 hours later, he would be brutally murdered by the woman he had offered his help to in his own home. The trio arrived at Glenn's house around 7 p.m. Initially, they only talked and drank beer. Sabina seemed very agitated, tense, and kept talking about her sister. She would sit down, jump up, rush to the window, and try to see something in the depths of the dark night. Then she would pull the curtains tightly shut, tremble, and be desperately afraid of something without giving any explanation. Soon, her behavior became strange. She refused to eat or drink, offered the men her cigarettes, and then snatched them out of their mouths, claiming they might be poisoned. Shortly before midnight, Peter grew tired of the strange spectacle, said goodbye, and left. What happened between Glenn and Sabina afterward is known only to Sabina herself. It is only known that Mr. Collins called his brother Paul, who worked at the University Hospital of North Staffordshire, around noon the next day and told him about the woman and her sister. He asked for help in obtaining information about Ursula's whereabouts, but realized it would not be easy. Then there is another dark spot in the story where no one knows what happened. On May 20th at 2:45 p.m., Glenn came out of his house and saw his neighbor Frank, who was washing his car in a cul-de-sac. He asked him for a few tea bags, got what he wanted, and went home. But just a minute later, he reappeared on the street, already bleeding. The only thing he could say was, "She stabbed me with a knife," and he fell dead on the cobblestones. According to police records, the ambulance arrived at the scene around 8 p.m., but as they approached the victim's house, the paramedics saw a true fury on the road, or rather on the safety island, a woman hitting herself on the head with a hammer. It later turned out that this woman was Sabina Eriksson. Just a few minutes earlier, she had stabbed Glenn multiple times in the kitchen and now stood completely deranged on the road, injuring herself and threatening other people. Some of the paramedics rushed to check if the injured man was still alive, while two ran towards Sabina. At the same time, one of the passing drivers, Joshua Grittick, braked in front of her, jumped out of his car and tried to take the hammer away from the madwoman. But Sabina once again showed incredible skill and strength. She dodged, pulled a stone from her pocket, and struck her would-be rescuer, causing him to fall to the ground. Seeing this absurd and terrifying turn of events, the paramedics immediately realized they were dealing with a dangerous patient who had to be neutralized and isolated at any cost. Although it is not usually the task of medical personnel to chase the insane, they rushed at Sabina to pin her down. But like a raging beast, she twisted with incredible speed and sprinted straight down the highway, scaring drivers with her swinging hammer. The chase lasted several minutes. It soon became clear that the woman was heading towards a multi-story motorway junction about 12 meters above the road. With a single leap, she climbed the bridge railing and, without a moment's hesitation, plunged into the depths. Thus ended one of the most bizarre and mysterious chases ever experienced in Britain. Sabina Eriksson survived, and her inexplicable episodes of madness probably gave her the strength of a movie superhero. What would have ended in death for most people ended for Sabina with only broken legs and head injuries in a hospital ward. She began behaving entirely normally again. Her aggression, delusions, and paranoia were gone. Either she genuinely remembered nothing of her actions or hid it masterfully. In any case, she told no one about it afterward. On June 6, 2008, she was brought in a wheelchair to her first court hearing. The prosecution had a long list of charges against the defendant and a complete lack of explanations and motives. Sabina's defense attorney fared no better. He had absolutely no idea how to explain his client's actions. Both sides quickly agreed that despite the psychiatrist's assessment that the defendant was currently sane, it was evident that both women were not themselves at the time of the crimes. How else could one explain what they did within a few days? Both the coroner and the leading psychiatrist in the country, Nigel Eastman, who participated in the trial, agreed with the defense. He described Sabina Eriksson's state at the time of the murder as an induced delusional disorder manifesting as mass psychosis, and said that she was now completely healthy at the time of the trial. The defense psychiatrist said that Sabina had clearly suffered from acute palimpsestic psychotic disorder in moments of madness, also caused by mass psychosis. In the fall of 2009, a British court charged Sabina Eriksson with several crimes, including the manslaughter of Glenn Hollinshead. She pleaded guilty but argued that she could not remember anything, had no malicious intent, and did everything in a state of confusion. Judge Justin Sanders described Sabina Eriksson's case as the most challenging in his career and stated that her guilt in the crimes was very low as she was unaware of her actions. He also added, "I understand that the family of the deceased victim will not be satisfied with my verdict. Nonetheless, I render the judgment based on the fact that the cause of the murder was a temporary insanity, and therefore the defendant's guilt is minor. The punishment aims not to penalize the defendant and does not reflect the suffering endured by Mr. Hollinshead's family." The cause of all the actions of the two twin sisters was attributed to mass psychosis, known by different names in various languages. Sabina Eriksson was thus sentenced to only 5 years in prison because the first crazy one was her sister Ursula, who infected Sabina with madness, and the virus of madness caused the woman to start hearing non-existent voices dictating strange actions. She suffered from delusional beliefs that she held as true. The case of the twin sisters Sabina and Ursula Eriksson is a case where the defendants could do nothing to prevent severe consequences. In September 2009, Sabina was sent to an ordinary women's prison, where she served only 439 days, less than a year and a half, and was then released on amnesty. Throughout her time behind bars, no one ever noticed any signs of mental illness in her. It was as if Sabina and Ursula had once succumbed to madness in May 2008 and then never thought about it again. One sister returned to live and work in the United States, while the other continued to live with her husband and children in Ireland. Neither sister has ever answered questions about what happened to them in May 2008. Some people still believe that the criminal justice system failed in the Eriksson sisters' case because it did not answer many questions or hold those responsible accountable. However, most people still tend to absolve the women themselves. Their actions are compared to the syndrome of a rabid dog. A sick animal is supposedly not responsible for its illness, but someone should have kept an eye on it and prevented it from biting innocent people. So said the brother of the murdered Glenn Hollinshead. Harry, I question the criminal justice system for allowing Sabina Eriksson to remain free and commit a severe crime. Her mental state should have been recognized in time, and she should have been isolated. But psychiatrists throw up their hands at his words. Without any diagnostic systems, they cannot identify such a state at first glance. Interestingly, the Eriksson sisters' elder brother, Bjorn, disagrees with the court's verdict, though for a different reason than the deceased victim's brother. In his opinion, Ursula and Sabina did not fall into a state of temporary insanity in May 2008, but were indeed fleeing from a real danger. He claims the women were running from a certain mad stalker who had threatened them, so they preferred to die and threw themselves under a car. To this day, the story of the strange madness of the twin sisters Ursula and Sabina Eriksson remains a great mystery. The city of Tallahassee in Florida was a quiet rural suburb, but when a university professor was left bleeding to death in his driveway, everything changed. The residents raised the alarm. The man's name is Daniel Eric Markel. He had 2 young sons and everything he needed in life. The police have no evidence, no suspects, no DNA traces, and only one witness who gave vague information about the case. This case will be neither quick nor easy to solve. The police will have to use all their experience and patience to get to the bottom of it. Daniel Eric Markel, born in 1972 in the Canadian city of Toronto, was a successful and very intelligent man. He studied at various universities, including the University of Jerusalem, Cambridge, and finally Harvard, where he graduated in law in 2001. In the following years, Daniel worked at a law firm, but in 2005, an opportunity arose that he couldn't pass up. The University of Florida was looking for someone with exactly his qualifications to teach at their law faculty, and he seized the chance. Daniel met the university's requirements perfectly. First, he enjoyed teaching, and second, he loved criminal law. While teaching various legal subjects at the university, he also found time to write many works on criminal law. Another welcome addition to Daniel's life was his new partner, Wendy Adelson, whom he met on a dating site for Jewish singles. Daniel was 33 years old at the time, and Wendy was 26, and they matched perfectly. Wendy also had a passion for criminal law and had studied it. Later, she taught at Florida State University, just like Daniel. Their relationship began so quickly that they couldn't wait to get married. In a short time, they got to know each other intensively, got engaged, and finally married on February 26, 2006. Daniel and Wendy lived their perfect life. They both had their dream jobs, a good income, and in 2009, they had their first son, followed by their second son in 2010. Life seemed perfect for them, and it continued that way until 2012 when their relationship failed and the couple separated. Before the divorce, the spouses kept all the details a secret, so no one can say with certainty why their marriage fell apart so dramatically. In 2013, they were divorced, and the image they presented to the public in no way reflected the life in their home and family. One day, Daniel was on a business trip, and when he returned and entered the house, he was shocked to find that the house was almost completely emptied. Wendy had left Daniel a few things, including a mattress. Wendy didn't take long to empty the house. She needed only a day and a night while Daniel was away. Although it was generally known that moving out of a house could be stressful and required careful planning, Wendy had obviously been thinking about it for some time. How far she went to ransack the house was proof of how much their marriage had fallen apart. Besides, she left one more thing for Daniel. On top of the mattress was a stack of divorce papers. A divorce was not that simple, and unfortunately Wendy had a lot of reasons to be angry, and apparently did her best to cause Daniel as much pain as possible. Throughout the entire process, Wendy changed the children's surnames to her own, and even changed the first name of one of the sons, which had been given in memory of one of Daniel's deceased relatives. Wendy took the separation hard and did her best to erase all traces of Daniel's presence in her life and the lives of their children. It was one thing when a man and a woman realized they no longer wanted to be together, but in the case of the children, they would probably still have to communicate. Trying to take the children away from their father or any other parent seems vengeful and heartless. Let's move a little further into 2014. Daniel and Wendy lived their own lives. Wendy had started writing a book about human trafficking, but it turned out she didn't have the same approach as Daniel, and it was a complete failure. The book was described as criminally poor, so people didn't need to rush to their local bookstores to buy such a masterpiece. On July 18th, 2014, Daniel set off to Wendy's house to pick up the children and take them to preschool. This was quite typical of his daily routine. He also went to the gym and visited a few stores. All in all, nothing special. But that was about to change soon. At 11 a.m., Daniel had finished his errands and returned home. When he stopped in front of his house, he noticed that someone was already waiting for him. It was not disclosed who Daniel was talking to on the phone at that moment, but the man told the police about the conversation and what he could hear and understand. He said that the man waiting for Daniel was lying in wait to attack him. There was no conversation between the two, just a loud bang before Daniel could even open his car door. The bullet flew through the driver's side window and hit him in the face with such speed that his head hit the headrest. A neighbor happened to hear the shot and saw the bloody scene with his own eyes. Daniel was still sitting upright in the driver's seat, shattered glass everywhere, and the interior of the car and the windshield were soaked in blood. The neighbor immediately called 911. He later said that he saw a car pull into the driveway, heard a shot, and saw Daniel severely injured in the front seat of the car. Daniel was still alive but couldn't call for help. The neighbor added that he didn't know if the man had tried to take his own life or if someone had shot him, but he definitely needed help. When the ambulance was called, the police tried to gather all possible information from the neighbor, but the only thing he saw was a silver Toyota Prius leaving the area immediately after the shot. The police had to take the case seriously, but it was also possible that it wasn't anything suspicious. It could have been someone just passing by. After 19 minutes, the ambulance arrived, and Daniel was taken to the nearest hospital. The person who had spoken with the neighbor hadn't informed the driver how serious the injured man's condition was, so it took 19 long minutes for the paramedics to arrive. Daniel had been shot in the face, and in such situations, every minute counts. We will never know if the late arrival of the ambulance contributed to it, but Daniel didn't survive his injuries. He died 14 hours later in intensive care. The police were now faced with a difficult task. A man who seemed to have no enemies, who was loved by everyone, had been cold-bloodedly shot in his driveway, and all they had to go on was a silver Toyota Prius that might or might not have been involved. Shortly thereafter, a memorial service was held for Daniel. Many people were present that day, including friends, family members, and students who wanted to express their love, honor, and respect for the professor. Since the police had no evidence or suspects, they had to decide where to start. The first suspect was Wendy Adelson, Daniel's ex-wife. She was brought to the police on the same day the man was shot. Wendy wasn't arrested, but the police had to start somewhere. When the woman entered the interrogation room, She listened to a voicemail left by a friend who worked as a real estate agent. The voicemail said, "Hello, Wendy. I feel a bit silly doing this. I'm not trying to dramatize the situation, but there was a shooting near your former home today. I hope you're okay." The message went on to say that the friend was sorry Wendy had to find out this way, but there had been a shooting outside her former home, and her ex-husband was very seriously injured and probably wouldn't survive. Wendy was very shocked and immediately broke into tears. She said she had been in contact with Daniel via email that morning and everything seemed fine. Then she asked the investigators what had happened to her ex-husband, and the police officer told her he couldn't provide any information until he established her whereabouts at the time of the shooting to rule her out as a suspect. Wendy seemed very empathetic, but at the same time almost inconsolable with grief. The woman told the police officer that she had left her house around noon to run some errands and had even tried to drive through her old street but noticed it was blocked off. When the police officers asked her if she knew anyone who might have a reason to harm Daniel, she just continued to cry uncontrollably. Finally, she responded that he sometimes treated people badly, but she didn't believe there was anyone who would be so cruel to him. When the investigator asked if Daniel owed anyone money, she tearfully replied that her ex-husband owed her money for child support. Wendy appeared genuinely shocked. She was beside herself with grief, and the officer conducting the interview treated her very gently and with compassion. The problem for the police was that they still had nothing concrete to go on. They believed it couldn't be a robbery since the man hadn't tried to break into Daniel's house, get into his car, or search his pockets to steal his wallet, house keys, or credit cards. At this point, there was only one motive for them: revenge. But for what could he have been avenging? Was Wendy really right? Had Daniel really hurt someone or done something wrong? Simply being annoying was one thing, but provoking someone to draw a gun and cold-bloodedly shoot a person in broad daylight was another. To find a lead, the police decided to turn to the public. They made it clear that this was a premeditated murder. A reward was immediately offered for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator, starting at $10,000, but increasing until it reached $25,000. An anonymous donor also offered an additional $100,000 on top of the police reward. The investigators soon expanded the pool of potential suspects, interviewing students, friends, and family members. But despite their efforts, it all led to nothing. Everyone around them kept saying the same thing. Daniel was a really good guy, a good teacher, a good father. It turned out that no one had the slightest idea why someone would want to kill him. In every murder investigation, the first 24 hours are crucial for gathering evidence. However, 12 months passed, and they still had nothing new. On the anniversary of the murder, another press conference was held. At this time, the police, for some inexplicable reason, released images of a silver Toyota Prius for the first time. The police never explained why they waited a whole year before releasing this information. After all, the car could have been burned or scrapped within 12 months. Another appeal to the public went unanswered, and the case remained open for another 12 months without any developments. Whoever committed the murder had now had more than enough time to dispose of all the evidence, and the police's chances of solving the case were slim to none. The case continued in this manner until May 26, 2016. Almost 2 years had passed since Daniel was murdered. A judge in Leon County had issued an arrest warrant for 34-year-old Sigfredo Garcia, who was charged with first-degree murder, specifically the murder of Daniel Markel. The Tallahassee police refused to release details at the time of the arrest, presumably to avoid jeopardizing the case. But a few days later, a judge in Leon County ordered the release of information. It turned out that investigators believed Garcia was an accomplice of Luis Rivera, a 33-year-old man, and that the two had left Miami in a rented silver Toyota Prius between July 16th and 17. The police had gathered various information about the two, including cell phone data, electronic toll records, and surveillance footage from various buildings and buses in the area. The footage was believed to show the duo following Daniel Markel on his daily route from the daycare to the gym, to shopping and back home on July 18th. But why were these two men suddenly suspects? And why did they decide to kill a man they seemingly had never met before? The police suspected it was a contract killing. Both men had been paid to kill Daniel Markel, and mysteriously, this information came from an informant who has remained anonymous ever since. This leaves a very important question unanswered. If this was a contract killing, who had hired the two? This was about to come to light. Whatever Garcia and Rivera were paid for their services, it wasn't enough to take the blame, and when they realized the game was up, they quickly began to spill everything. When questioned by the police, they told the investigators that they had been hired by none other than Charlie and Donna Adelson. Charlie was the brother of Daniel's ex-wife, Wendy, and Donna was their mother. Both were seemingly honorable people who jointly ran the pathology clinic of the Adelson Institute. Charlie was a dentist, and Donna was in charge of patient care. You might not believe it, but all this information alone wasn't enough to bring Charlie and Donna to court. As far as the police knew, the suspects could have named anyone to save their own skins. And what connection could there be between a respectable family man running a dental clinic and two contract killers from Miami? Surprisingly, it didn't take long to figure that out. It turned out that the missing link was a woman named Catherine Magbanua. She was not only involved with Charlie Adelson, but also had a previous relationship with Sigfredo Garcia, with whom she had 2 children. Phone records showed that Catherine received a call from Luis Rivera almost immediately after the murder of Daniel Markel, presumably to inform her that the job was done. Catherine was the sole intermediary between Rivera, Garcia, and the Adelsons. They claimed they had never met before. Catherine received $100,000 to organize everything. Looking at her bank account, it was clear that Catherine had made deposits totaling tens of thousands of dollars over a 12-month period. This began a few months before Daniel Markel's murder and continued for months afterward. Wasn't that a bit too stupid? The payments were almost always released in the form of checks. That wasn't a smart move by the Adelson family. Checks are very easy to trace for a simple reason. They have to be signed by someone. Each deposited check was signed by Donna Adelson. Hatred is too strong a word, but in this case, it might be appropriate. Donna Adelson hated her former son-in-law, especially in the months leading up to the murder. She sent Wendy email after email cursing and insulting him. In one of the emails, she said Wendy had suffered enough because of him when they were married. His narcissism had ruined their marriage. She suggested hitting him where it hurt the most. The entire Adelson family lived in Miami, but Wendy didn't. She had settled near Daniel in Tallahassee, but desperately wanted to move to Miami to be closer to her family. Since Daniel hadn't done anything violent like stalking his ex-wife or similar behavior, he went to court and obtained an order preventing Wendy from moving away with the children. This was because they had agreed on a 50-50 custody arrangement during the divorce. However, there was another reason why his mother-in-law despised him so much. Shortly before his murder, Daniel had gone to court and filed a petition that would have prevented Donna Adelson from spending time alone with his children without Daniel's supervision. Of course, this in no way justified Donna's actions, as we know the murder was planned long before the petition was filed in court. So far, everything seems pretty straightforward and clear, right? The mother-in-law was very angry. The daughter's ex-husband had gone too far. But you shouldn't believe it. Luis Rivera almost let this case slip through the cracks. Rivera, who was serving a prison sentence without bail, asked for permission to speak with the investigators. He said he had information that could be exchanged for a deal. The investigators readily agreed and agreed to question him again. Luis described his version of events to the investigators. He claimed he didn't know someone might be killed until he was already in the car with Garcia. He had been told it was a simple robbery. When he learned about the murder of Markel, he said he didn't like it at all and had only offered to rob the woman who would pay for the job. He and Garcia were supposed to be paid $35,000 each. Nevertheless, Rivera said he didn't want to kill a man who had 2 children, whom he had never met and had nothing against. Rivera claimed he had never heard the man's name before and didn't know what he looked like until he was shown a picture. He claimed he had never heard of the Adelsons until that point, but referred to a woman named Kathy, short for Catherine. Rivera said she was the main person responsible for the whole thing and mentioned that a woman wanted her children back. She wanted full custody of them. Up to that point, the Adelsons had denied any involvement in the murder. Although the police had checks signed by Donna Adelson, it didn't prove she actually wanted to kill Daniel. These checks could have been issued for various reasons. Then the FBI stepped in. They developed a special operation to catch this family. Charlie Adelson received strange calls. These calls were made by a man who called himself Sandy. Sandy asked why Rivera wasn't being taken care of inside the prison and why his family wasn't being taken care of outside. Charlie was visibly scared by the calls, but managed to keep his composure long enough not to give himself away. Sandy was, of course, an undercover investigator, and FBI agents had hacked into Charlie's mobile phone to learn something they could use against him. But this attempt failed for the time being. In July 2016, a court in Leon County charged Rivera with first-degree murder. Catherine was also arrested shortly thereafter. Rivera, who was already in prison for other crimes, managed to have his charge reduced to second-degree murder, presumably through cooperation and a guilty plea. He was sentenced to 12 years for other crimes and was to receive another 19 years for aiding in the murder of Daniel Markel. The trials for Catherine and Sigfredo were consolidated. This happened on October 19, 2016. Since the two defendants faced the same charge, the defense argued that Charlie Adelson was the mastermind behind the whole dirty affair. He had allegedly promised $100,000 for the murder, which was to be divided among the three so his sister could get full custody of her children without Daniel's interference. During the trial, the prosecutor called an interesting witness, a man named Jeffrey Lacoste, who happened to be Wendy Adelson's ex-boyfriend. He confirmed that he had heard from Wendy that her brother Charlie had discussed the possibility of hiring a hitman to kill Daniel several times. Jeffrey revealed that Wendy had asked him on July 13th if she could tell him something in confidence. She eventually revealed that Charlie had explored all possible solutions to her problem and had talked about finding a hitman to kill Professor Markel. She told Jeffrey that it would cost about $50,000. During the trial, Sigfredo Garcia argued that the fatal shot was fired by his accomplice, Luis Rivera. The problem was that Rivera always claimed the opposite was true, but that was hardly enough to acquit Garcia of first-degree murder. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, plus another 30 years for conspiracy. The man made it clear he would appeal the verdict. Catherine, or Kathy, as she was sometimes called, denied any involvement in the murder. In the same trial as Garcia, her charge was reduced to second-degree murder. The jurors couldn't reach a decision, and the judge declared a mistrial, meaning Catherine would have to stand trial again. Catherine's retrial began on May 16, 2022, and lasted 11 days. This time, the jurors were more convinced of their decision. On May 27, 2022, she was found guilty of premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus another 30 years for conspiracy and another 30 years for incitement. Since it was believed that the three main perpetrators were behind bars, this case should be closed, but not quite. Just when everything seemed to be resolved, a new arrest was made. On April 21, 2022, the police arrived at the address of Charlie Adelson. The man was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and incitement to commit murder. As a result of this discovery, the police obtained audio recordings of a conversation between Catherine and Charlie in which both spoke about the conspiracy to commit a crime. Charlie is set to stand trial later this year, and as this case draws to a close, one can't help but feel that there are still many unanswered questions. Indeed, the case is not yet closed, and the big question is, how much did Wendy really know? Judging by the witnesses' testimonies, it was clear why Daniel Eric Markel had to be killed to secure Wendy full custody of her children. It's not hard to speculate that Wendy was much more involved in this case than she has admitted. However, it's important to emphasize that there is no evidence to support this, and Wendy has not been charged with any crime. Donna Adelson is the same woman who signed all those different checks for thousands of dollars. It has been irrefutably proven that she despised her former son-in-law and wanted to make his life as difficult as possible. It's unknown to what extent she was involved, whether she merely signed the checks or was involved in the planning. Just like her daughter, there is no conclusive evidence against her, and no charges have been filed. Charlie Adelson is the only family member who will appear in court, at least for now. Perhaps if Charlie faces a life sentence, he might reveal a few more details. As the case progressed, more and more people became entangled in this criminal web. Despite his mother-in-law's accusations, Daniel Markel did not deserve to die. All his friends and colleagues praised the extensive legacy he left behind and the extensive works he wrote on various areas of law. Above all, his two sons, whom he loved dearly, lost their father. Daniel lived for his children, which explains why he often went to court. He had to ensure they were never taken away from him. Undoubtedly, he would have had much more to offer this world if he had been given the chance. Unfortunately, his life was cut short at the age of only 41 by two men he had never met, and by a woman, Catherine, whom he had also never seen. But you already know who is really behind all this. It's worth noting that this case and the verdicts have shocked the public. Many believe that the two main people responsible for all of this, who clearly wanted and planned everything, are wrongfully free. Thank you for watching. I recommend you check out the other cases as well. Click here and don't forget to activate your notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. See you soon and take care.